The Imperial guards found him hiding in the abandoned villa's wine cellar, clutching a small vial of poison in his trembling hand. This wasn't a common criminal or political rebel. This was Sporus, barely 20 years old, once the Empress of Rome, about to take his own life rather than face what the new emperor had planned for him in the Colosseum. To understand why death seemed like mercy compared to what awaited him, we must go back 3 years to when a grieving, half-mad emperor first laid eyes on a teenage boy who looked eerily like his dead wife. What follows isn't just another tale of Roman excess. It's the most disturbing case of identity theft in human history, where the thief didn't steal a name or fortune but an entire person's existence, surgically erasing one life to resurrect another. The most terrifying part? Everything recounted here comes from official Roman records. In Rome, 65 AD, the most powerful man in the world became a murderer, not through war or execution, which were everyday occurrences in the empire, but by his own hands. Emperor Nero killed his pregnant wife, Poppaea Sabina, in their private chambers. Some sources claim it was a single devastating kick to her swollen belly. Others describe a brutal beating that left her hemorrhaging on the marble floor. Nero, realizing what he'd done, screamed for physicians who could not reverse death, even for a god emperor. Poppaea wasn't just any imperial wife. She was Nero's obsession, his muse, the one person who matched his grandiose view of himself. Contemporary accounts describe her as possessing almost supernatural beauty. Amber-colored hair that caught light like spun gold, skin so pale it seemed to glow, and enormous doe-like eyes that Roman poets compared to those of Venus herself. Nero's grief wasn't normal human mourning. When you command an empire of 60 million souls, when you've been told since childhood you're descended from gods, when reality bends to your will, the death of your beloved isn't just loss. It's a personal insult from the universe, a boundary that dares to exist when you recognize none. Nero's response shocked even the jaded Roman aristocracy. He refused traditional cremation, instead having Poppaea's body embalmed with more spices than the entire Arabian Peninsula produced in a year. Her corpse, dressed in her finest robes, was placed in a crystal sarcophagus where he could see her. Palace servants reported finding the emperor holding full conversations with the body, setting places for her at dinner, and asking her opinions on matters of state. Court physicians, brave or foolish enough to approach him, tried to explain that grief could manifest strangely. But Nero wasn't just grieving, he was fracturing. Sleep became impossible without massive doses of poppy wine. He would wake screaming Poppaea's name, convinced he heard her calling from the next room. Food lost all taste unless prepared exactly as she liked it. He ordered her chambers preserved precisely as she left them, down to the position of her hairbrush. But the most disturbing behavior began 2 months after her death. Nero started seeing her everywhere. In the face of a young slave girl bringing wine, in the profile of a senator's wife at the games, in the features of prostitutes in Rome's seedier districts. He would stop mid-sentence during meetings, staring at women who bore even the slightest resemblance to Poppaea, sometimes terrifying them by grabbing their faces to search for something that wasn't there. The imperial household held its breath, waiting for this madness to pass. Instead, it intensified. Nero commissioned hundreds of paintings and sculptures of Poppaea, demanding artists capture not just her appearance but her essence. When they failed, how could paint and marble capture a living soul? He flew into rages, sometimes ordering artists beaten, sometimes weeping like a child. Then, in late 65 AD, everything changed. While reviewing administrative appointments, a mind-numbing task he usually delegated, Nero looked up from his scrolls and time stopped. A young freedman, recently promoted to a minor clerical position, stood before him. The boy, no more than 15, had Poppaea's eyes. Not similar eyes, but the exact same enormous dark-lashed eyes that had captivated Nero years before, framed by the same delicate bone structure, with the same amber flecks catching the light of the oil lamps. Nero rose so quickly that scrolls scattered across the floor. The court held its collective breath as he circled the terrified boy like a predator studying prey, his expression a mix of desperate hope and manic joy. "What is your name?" Nero's voice was barely a whisper. "Sporus, Divine Augustus." "I am Sporus," the boy replied. Sporus wasn't just any slave. born into the imperial household to a Germanic captive mother who died in childbirth. He was raised in the palace's labyrinthine servants' quarters, educated alongside other freedmen's children in Greek, Latin, mathematics, and rhetoric. His delicate features and quick intelligence marked him for administrative service rather than manual labor. But in that moment, Sporus ceased to be an individual. He became a canvas for an emperor's delusion. Nero's examination lasted what felt like an eternity, though it was likely only minutes. He touched the boy's face, turned it to catch the light, ran fingers through his hair. Sporus stood frozen, intelligent enough to know his life hung in the balance, but not yet grasping the full horror awaiting him. Finally, Nero stepped back, his smile described by one chronicler as the expression of a man who has discovered the secret of defeating death itself. He canceled the day's appointments and summoned his physicians, ordering them to prepare their finest chambers and sharpest instruments. Work was to be done. The transformation of Sporus didn't begin with surgery. That came later. First, Nero studied his subject to understand how this boy could be molded into his lost love. For days, Sporus was kept in luxurious chambers adjacent to Nero's, subjected to endless examinations and measurements. Artists who had painted Poppaea from life were ordered to create comparative sketches, noting where Sporus matched her and where he differed. Nero pored over these studies with scholarly intensity, planning modifications. He analyzed not just physical appearance but mannerisms, making Sporus speak for hours to correct his pronunciation and mimic Poppaea's distinctive vowel elongations. He tested the boy's walk, gestures, and hand positions, noting every deviation for correction. The psychological torture began immediately. Sporus was forbidden to use his own name. Servants addressed him as lady or mistress. His simple tunics were replaced with flowing stolas in Poppaea's favorite colors. He was taught to apply elaborate cosmetics, not the subtle touches of a Roman youth, but the full makeup of a noblewoman. Imagine waking each morning, looking into a polished bronze mirror, and seeing your own face systematically erased. Servants reported that Sporus barely spoke or ate, moving through his days like someone in a waking nightmare. Yet he didn't resist. How could he? One complaint meant death, or worse. Nero openly shared his plans, speaking excitedly as if describing a masterpiece. Physicians, threatened with death if they refused and promised rewards if they succeeded, devised procedures beyond simple castration. They aimed to surgically transform Sporus into a woman, rebuilding his body to approximate a feminine form. The night before the surgery, Nero visited Sporus, bringing a small wooden box containing Poppaea's wedding ring, a massive emerald surrounded by pearls. "Tomorrow," Nero said, sliding the ring onto Sporus's finger where it hung loosely, "you will be reborn. You will become who you were always meant to be, and I will love you as I loved her." Sporus's voice was barely audible. "Will it hurt?" For a moment, something almost human flickered in Nero's eyes, then vanished. "Birth always hurts," he replied, "but what emerges is beautiful." The surgery took place in a specially prepared chamber in the palace's medical wing. Details are sparse, but it lasted hours, with screams audible 3 corridors away despite thick walls. Nero paced outside, shouting encouragement as if his words could ease the agony. Recovery took months. Infection was a constant threat in an age before antibiotics. The modifications were so extensive that Sporus had to relearn basic functions. Nero was ever present, supervising healing, adjusting poppy extract doses, and even changing bandages himself. This care might seem tender until you recall its purpose. Nero wasn't nursing a person but crafting an object to fulfill his obsession. Every kindness came with a reminder of what Sporus was becoming. As Sporus healed physically, the psychological transformation intensified. Tutors taught him to walk in the small, swaying steps of a Roman matron, to move his hands gracefully, to hold a wine cup delicately, and to gesture with restraint. Voice training was relentless, with hours spent practicing higher, softer tones to sound feminine, mimicking Poppaea's phrases and laugh. A wardrobe of exact replicas of Poppaea's iconic dresses was commissioned, her jewelry reset to fit Sporus's proportions, her perfumes recreated with rare oils. Sporus learned the complex rituals of a noblewoman's day, hours-long beauty routines, elaborate hairstyling, and the proper way to recline at dinner parties or engage in witty conversation. Nero didn't just want Sporus to look and act like Poppaea, he wanted him to be her. Sporus memorized her history, her childhood in Pompeii, her first marriage, her rise in Roman society. He learned her friends' names, favorite foods, and opinions on poetry and politics. When Nero reminisced about shared moments, Sporus had to respond as if he remembered them. His first public appearance, 6 months after the surgery, was at a small dinner party with Nero's closest advisors. Dressed in Poppaea's purple gown, her jewelry glittering, Sporus's entrance stopped conversation. The resemblance was uncanny. In soft lighting with expertly applied cosmetics, he looked eerily like the dead empress. Nero beamed, introducing him as my beloved Sabina, using Poppaea's family name. The guests, masters of political survival, played along, complimenting Sabina's beauty and including her in conversations as if nothing was amiss. But the illusion wasn't perfect. Tacitus noted Sporus's slightly too large hands, the masculine broadness of his shoulders, and moments when his natural voice broke through. More heartbreaking were glimpses of his own personality, sharp intelligence, dry wit, profound sadness that had nothing to do with Poppaea. These were quickly suppressed. Any deviation risked Nero's cold withdrawal or threats to find a better Poppaea. The wedding announcement in early 67 AD shocked even those accustomed to Nero's madness. Proclaimed as a legitimate state occasion, the ceremony followed traditional Roman rituals. Preparations were grotesque in their normalcy. Priests arranged sacrifices, the procession route was decorated, and invitations were mandatory for senators and dignitaries. On the wedding day, Sporus wore the saffron veil of a Roman bride, his face painted with ceremonial cosmetics. A massive dowry was transferred, and contracts were signed as if the union could produce heirs. Nero performed the rituals with disturbing sincerity, carrying Sporus over the threshold. The feast was lavish, with peacocks stuffed with songbirds and wine from Caesar's cellars. Guests offered gifts, jewelry, household goods, even fertility amulets, while maintaining frozen smiles. Behind the facade, everyone knew they were witnessing a violation of Roman values, natural law, and human dignity. Yet they applauded, because the alternative was death. Life as Nero's empress was an endless performance. Sporus woke in Poppaea's chambers, surrounded by her possessions, dressed by her former servants in her clothes and cosmetics. Every gesture and word had to maintain the fiction. Public appearances were grueling. Sporus sat in the empress's box at the Colosseum, was carried in her litter through Rome's streets, and received ceremonial honors. The Roman people stared at this boy transformed into a ghost of a dead woman. During Nero's tour of Greece in 67 AD, the Greeks treated Sporus as an empress, and he presided over banquets and religious ceremonies, even enduring prayers for children despite the biological impossibility. In private, the horror deepened. Nero expected Sporus to respond to intimacy as Poppaea, recreating her preferences and private moments. Any failure could trigger rage or cold disappointment, which felt like death to someone whose survival depended on pleasing a madman. The imperial household treated Sporus with pity, fear, and disgust, seeing him as neither man nor woman, slave nor free. Servants whispered of seeing him alone in the gardens at dawn, standing still as if he'd forgotten how to exist when not performing. Escape attempts were futile. Sporus's transformed appearance and imperial jewelry made him instantly recognizable. One recorded attempt ended with his accomplices crucified in the palace courtyard, visible from his window. Yet Nero's moments of kindness were perhaps the cruelest, as he seemed to believe he had resurrected Poppaea, showering Sporus with gifts and tender conversation. Historical accounts suggest Sporus developed a dissociative disorder, referring to himself as Poppaea, even alone, speaking in two voices to mirrors. His identity blurred, perhaps the only way to cope with daily trauma. In spring 68 AD, Nero's empire collapsed. Rebellions erupted, the Senate declared him an enemy, and the Praetorian Guard abandoned him. Fleeing Rome with loyal servants, Nero kept Sporus by his side, unable to leave his artificial Pappia. In their final days in a villa outside Rome, Nero clung to Sporus, calling him my only love, my resurrection, begging him to die together. When capture loomed, Nero chose suicide, asking Sporus to perform ritual lamentations as Pappia would have. As Nero pressed a dagger to his throat, Sporus guided it, perhaps his only merciful act. With Nero dead, Sporus's nightmare continued. As a symbol of Nero's excesses, he was a prize for the next rulers. Galba treated him with cold courtesy, keeping him in the palace but ignoring him. After Galba's murder, Otho, Poppeia's former husband, saw Sporus as an echo of his lost love, even promising marriage before his own suicide. Under Vitellius, Sporus faced a final horror, a public spectacle in the Colosseum, reenacting the myth of Proserpina, abducted and killed by gladiators dressed as demons. Learning of this, Sporus chose death by his own hand, likely with poison, at around 20 years old. The tragedy of Sporus raises profound questions about identity, autonomy, and the corruption of power. He was systematically destroyed and rebuilt to serve Nero's delusion, his body mutilated, his mind forced to impersonate someone he'd never met. We know little of the real Sporus, his thoughts, dreams, or personality before Nero's gaze fell upon him. His name, possibly a cruel nickname meaning seed, underscores his transformation. His suicide may have been his only act of self-determination, though some see small resistances in his breaking voice or escape attempt. The complicity of others, physicians, tutors, courtiers, servants, enabled this horror. They prioritized survival over a boy's humanity, a reminder of what happens when power lacks conscience. Sporus's story, often a footnote in Roman history, deserves remembrance not just as a victim but as a person who endured unimaginable circumstances, and in his final act, chose freedom over further degradation. The ruins of Nero's palace still stand in Rome, buried beneath later constructions. Somewhere in those chambers, Sporus lived his stolen life, standing before mirrors reflecting a stranger, practicing a voice not his own. The stones remember, even if history is largely forgotten, the boy forced to become a ghost. If this story has affected you, share your thoughts below. For more hidden histories revealing the extremes of human behavior, subscribe and hit the notification bell.